Hey, have you had this experience? You're watching a video in English and you understand almost everything. You're listening to a podcast and you're following the conversation. Maybe you're even watching a film without subtitles and you're thinking, wow, my English is actually getting pretty good. And then someone asks you a simple question in English. Hey, what did you do this weekend? And suddenly, nothing. You know the words, you understand the question, you know exactly what you want to say, but somehow the words just don't come out. And then 5 minutes later, you're thinking, why didn't I say that? I know how to say that. If this sounds familiar, don't worry. It's extremely common among English learners. And today, we are going to talk about why this happens and, more importantly, what you can do about it. Understanding English and speaking English are different skills. Here's something that many learners don't realize. Understanding a language and producing a language are two different skills. Think about music. You might listen to a song and immediately recognize it. You know the melody, you know when the chorus is coming, you might even know all the words. But if somebody gives you a guitar and says, okay, play it, that's completely different. Recognizing something is easier than producing it yourself. English works in a similar way. When you're watching a video, the speaker is doing most of the work for you. They're choosing the vocabulary, they are building the sentences, they are deciding which tense to use. You simply have to understand what they're saying. But when you speak, you have to do all of that. You have to find the vocabulary, you have to build the sentence, you have to pronounce the words, and you have to do it quickly because somebody is standing there waiting for your answer. That's much more difficult. You may know more English than you can actually use. There's another important difference. You have what we could call passive English and active English. Your passive English includes the words and expressions you recognize when you hear or read them. Your active English includes the language that you can actually produce when you need it. And for many learners, there is a huge gap between the two. Maybe you recognize 5,000 English words. Great. But how many of those words can you immediately use in conversation? That is the important question. You may know the word exhausted. If I say, I was absolutely exhausted after work, you understand it immediately. But imagine I ask, how did you feel after work yesterday? Would exhausted naturally come to your mind? Or would you say, I was very tired? That's the difference. The word exists in your brain, but you haven't trained your brain to retrieve it quickly. Stop building every sentence from scratch. Another reason speaking can feel difficult is that many learners try to build every sentence word by word. And sometimes they translate the sentence from their first language at the same time. Imagine someone asks, what do you think about working from home? Your brain starts working. Okay, what do I think? How do I say this in English? Which tense do I need? What's the word for this? Is this preposition correct? By the time you've built the perfect sentence, the conversation has already moved on. Fluent speakers don't normally create every sentence completely from scratch. We use thousands of expressions that we have used before. Things like, it depends, to be honest, I don't really know, the thing is, as far as I know, I've never thought about that. That's a good question. These little expressions give you something incredibly valuable. Time. Imagine I ask you, would you ever move to another country? Instead of immediately trying to create the perfect answer, you could say, that's a good question. I've never really thought about that. I suppose it would depend on the country. Now you're speaking. And while you're saying those familiar expressions, your brain has time to prepare what comes next. That is one of the reasons learning phrases and expressions can be much more useful than memorizing individual words. The problem might not be your English. Sometimes learners tell me, my English isn't good enough to speak. But then I look at their English and they know plenty of vocabulary. They understand grammar, they can read, they can write. The problem isn't always a lack of English. Sometimes it's simply a lack of speaking practice. Imagine going to the gym and only watching videos about exercise. You watch hundreds of videos. You learn everything about training. You know which exercises work. You know exactly how to use them. But you never actually exercise. Would you become stronger? Of course not. Language works the same way. Watching English videos is useful. Reading is useful. Studying vocabulary is useful. But if your goal is to speak English, at some point, you have to actually speak. And you don't need another person every time. You can practice by yourself. A simple way to practice. Here's something you can start doing today. Choose one simple question every day. For example, what did I do today? What do I want to do this weekend? What's something I'd like to learn? Then answer the question aloud, not in your head, out loud. And you don't write your answer first. That is important. Because if you write everything first and then read it, you're just practicing reading. You're not really practicing spontaneous speaking. Give yourself 30 seconds, then 1 minute. Eventually, try speaking for 2 minutes. You will make mistakes, you will forget words, you will probably repeat yourself. That's completely normal. The purpose isn't to sound perfect. The purpose is to teach your brain. When I need English, I need to produce it. Let's try it right now. Actually, let's practice together. I'm going to give you a question, and I want you to answer it aloud. Don't write anything. Don't search for vocabulary. Don't try to prepare the perfect answer. Just use the English that you already have. Here is your question. If you could live anywhere in the world for 1 year, where would you live and why? I'll give you a few seconds. Pause. Did you answer? If you did, great. Now think about what happened. Maybe you couldn't remember a word. Maybe you started a sentence and didn't know how to finish it. Maybe you made a grammar mistake. That's useful information. Because now you have discovered the English that you actually need. And that's much more valuable than randomly memorizing another list of 20 words. One final thought. So, if you understand English but struggle to speak it, don't immediately assume you need more grammar, more vocabulary, or another textbook. Maybe you do need some of those things. But maybe you already know enough English to have a conversation. You simply haven't trained yourself to use it quickly. Listen to English, read English, learn new words, but don't forget to produce English too. Speak to people when you have the opportunity. Talk to yourself. Answer questions aloud. Record voice notes. Retell something you watched. And most importantly, don't wait until your English is perfect before you start speaking. Because speaking isn't something you do after you become fluent. Speaking is one of the things that helps you become fluent. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next Tuesday English podcast.